We need to figure out how we're going to protect the most amount of people possible with the least amount of dollars. That then allows the threat intelligence providers to really improve their threat data. And we really do, I think, a good job for serving not just our customers, but everybody who consumes threat data.
Across our network, we do approximately 50 billion queries in a month.
Working with a free service is wonderful in some ways and terrible in others.
Any key innovations that you think are worthy of noting over the past year or two?
We have zero friction for people to adopt Quad9. You just change your DNS setting to 9.9.9.9. That's it. No email sign up, no payment, nothing, no contract. Our goal this year is to actually have some proof of concept for IP-based blocking.
We should definitely work on it together.
We're very grateful to our partners for giving us that capability.
Deep in the digital shadows, where threats hide behind any random byte, a fearless crew of cybersecurity warriors guards the line between chaos and order. Their epic battles, rarely spoken of until today. Welcome to the Defender's Log, where we crack open the secrets of top security chiefs, CISOs, and architects who faced the abyss and won. Here's your host, David Redekop.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Defender's Log. And with me today, I have a gentleman by the name of John Todd, who's played a number of roles in technology in the Defender space over the years. And I'm looking forward to just chatting with you today. So, John, welcome. Glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David.
What preceded this call and this invitation is that I did meet John in person and on Zoom a number of times because we are in the space of defending in the DNS world because of the power of DNS. That is no surprise to anyone in this space. It is being used by good and bad purposes. And so one of the things that we have in common with John and his role at Quad9 is that we are pretty much dedicating our time and our thinking and our cognitive processes around how can we defend the world against the bad. What you've accomplished so far, John, is very encouraging to the world as a whole. You really stand out from everybody else that's doing any kind of protective DNS offerings. And so today's a little bit about asking you some questions and what. Let's start with that, actually. What got you into this general space of being in the defensive role?
I want to make sure that people understand that Quad9 is mostly not me. It's mostly the rest of my team. I just simply stand on the front of the ship and have these podcasts, but it's everybody else's hard work that's really pushing things forward. Almost everyone in the organization is coming out of some kind of either infrastructure or security world. And so my voyage there was, I started back in the early 90s at one of some of the first commercial internet service providers in the US. And that sort of automatically migrates you into a security mindset if you're working in an ISP. Both delivering infrastructure, delivering services to people, there always has to be the concept of how you keep them from shooting themselves in the foot, shooting yourself in the foot. So security is always a part of that thinking. Went through a number of different roles over the years. Again, ISP, did a number of different ISPs, worked in various co-location and layer one companies, doing actual server hosting or infrastructure hosting. Then, as a common thread is a lot of people went into the voice over IP world, so I did that for a number of years as well. There seemed to be a natural transition of an interesting application. We went from the network itself to applications on the network, and then did some things with gaming, and then essentially went into the nonprofit space, trying to help people instead of simply just trying to make money. And the thread on all of those is that the DNS was a vital component in every one of those different enterprises, even the ones that didn't sound like it was. Co-location hosting doesn't sound like DNS is part of that. But it is when you try to figure out, okay, how do you get people into a building? How do you attract people into a facility? You have to have essentially a set number of core services that you're sort of offering there. And the DNS is typically one of them, and DNS in various functions, whether that's authoritative servers or root servers or whatever. So Quad9 was an outcome of sort of that career arc. This is a perfect place for me to be, and I'm so happy I'm here. It's a natural place to end up. Quad9 started now 8 years ago with an initiative by Global Cyber Alliance, GCA, got some funding. They said, hey, we need to figure out how we're going to protect the most amount of people possible with the least amount of dollars. And the quick summary they came up with, well, let's build a recursive resolver. They weren't really a technical shop. They weren't an operations shop. So they came to Packet Clearinghouse, PCH, which at that time was where I was working. And they said, well, can you build this for us? And I took the project on, and we very quickly realized that building a recursive resolver at scale that people would use was not simply just to throw a couple dollars at it and make it work, and not just a couple servers. So the first thing we figured out is this needs to be its own organization. It needs to be not GCA. It needs to be not PCH. It needs to be its own separate, not-for-profit or foundation with
Right.
its own board of directors, its own funding, basically ownership of its fate. And so we created that back in whatever it was, 2016, 2017, and launched the project. And the last organization to join at the last minute was IBM. They had 9/8, 256th of the internet, or 255th of the internet.
Right.
And the timing was really great. There were some really good, clueful people at IBM that we talked to, and they allocated 9990 to us. And so that's /24. So now that is part of what Quad9 is, and it's our namesake. And so they've been a really great partner over the years as well. So those are our three founding organizations. And we actually launched the project publicly in 2017, even though we were active before that. And we've been growing like gangbusters ever since.
And you know what's amazing to me, just as you relayed that a little bit around the nine space, is that at least in my circle, IBM got the most credit out of this sponsorship, out of this project, out of any of the sponsors, because if you
their
live
number.
in if it's their number,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's like, wow, I'm sure somebody at the marketing department of IBM realized that there was going to be tremendous value in
Yeah.
just giving up that
Interestingly,
/24.
I'm not slating IBM here, but I don't think they've done as much work as they could promoting this. I don't think, IBM's been one of our
Yeah.
greatest sponsors, but they're not, then they give us really great threat data. So that's kind of their
Sure.
participation. They've not made hay with this the way I thought they would. I mean, the Quad9 as an organization is doing really well globally. I mean, we've got more than 100 million users on the platform. We're in 260 locations in 130 countries now, I think. I can't remember how many countries we're in. A lot. And the protection that we're providing, really the service we're providing to people for free, is absolutely fantastic. And I love IBM, but I don't think they've not taken this the way they could. I'd love to see
Wow.
more publicity on it. But they're a big company. We're really working with our security division, and it's so we see that side of things. And with big companies come challenges with how you communicate that out to the rest of the place. But IBM's done great things for us. But if you're listening, you could do a lot more. They're one of our best threat providers, but we have about 35 different threat providers as well. So then we treat them all equally. There's no one that gets any particular special preference. What we do, the way we actually bring threat providers onto the network, is that we offer them information back. So they give us domains that they know are risks, malware, phishing, CNC, stalkerware, a whole variety of different bad things. They give us the domains, and as soon as we ingest them and we apply them to our system, anybody who tries to go to one of those domains that's trying to do them harm, they're blocked. We essentially prevent them from connecting. It's a very simple model. It's just, don't answer the DNS question, but quite powerful. And at that moment, then we also send back to the threat provider a couple of pieces of information. We send them the timestamp that the event happened. We send them the fully qualified name that the person was trying to reach. And we give them a really rough geography, like a metropolitan region of where that client was. That then allows the threat intelligence providers to really improve their threat data. So we're not just improving the threat data for ourselves, but these companies aren't they're not doing this entirely altruistically, right? They're getting really interesting data from us that then allows them to say, okay, is this threat increasing? Is it decreasing? What is the rough geography? Like, who are the targets for these malicious activities? So that allows them to improve their data that they send to us, but it also allows them to improve the data that they're sending to their paid customers. So everybody wins in this equation, and we really do, I think, a good job for serving not just our customers, but everybody who consumes threat data from any of the threat intelligence providers that we work with.
Right. Yeah, and I can say firsthand how well that service works. And to help you with the, let's call out IBM here with some good news. The second order effect
Yeah.
of the Quad9 service is that it is now a default in our DNS Harmony product. So even the free users of DNS Harmony that can basically aggregate protective resolvers in real time, Quad9 is on that list by default.
Awesome.
And one of the things that I just was doing a little research project yesterday, and I noticed that there's an incredible correlation between all the threat data that Quad9 blocks and what clean browsing does, another provider. So I'm like, I wonder if Daniel Sid is using Quad9 as a source because
Well, I mean, this is not uncommon. I don't know if they use this as a source or not, but it's not uncommon that there's a lot of threat data sharing, where one company will buy from another and basically not say anything, right? So that's fine. I think that's a great idea, that sharing, and it's sort of ultimately the best sources will start to bubble up to the surface. It will become obvious to you who's got the broadest coverage. The broadest coverage isn't necessarily the best coverage, though. And we have some really fascinating insights on the threat intelligence providers that we have, although we don't compare them against each other, because there are some threat intelligence providers who only give us a really small handful of domains. It might be a couple hundred domains, every day, fresh new domains that they give us, that don't generate a huge amount of blocks. However, when we really look at them, we find out that these are, very targeted spear phishing campaigns, or they're very far in advance. They've discovered something very far in advance. So it's incredibly difficult to qualitatively compare a domain or a threat protection event against another. And so we've learned that there are some that are, have an enormous amount of blocks, but they're all very noisy botnets, right? So the value of those might be relatively lower, although I can't say that for certain because I don't know what bad events would have occurred because of it. But you can see that there are lots that have huge amounts of blocks, and there's some that have few. But I don't know if those are any better or worse than each other. And our goal is to see if we can aggregate all of those together. And that kind of, like, somebody using Quad9 as a source, as an example, but great. If you want to embed Quad9 into the product, we actually completely encourage that. All right. So, and again,
Right.
with Atom Networks, we're very thrilled to have that as a default. But yeah, it is interesting to see some of the data showing up on various lists and how long it takes and things like that.
I would also commend you on the low false positivity rate, because that is such an important aspect of how you bring on a new threat intel source, is your ranking of importance of keeping the list clean and cleaned up. I can speak to it from the perspective of doing large scale deployments. So across our network, we do approximately 50 billion queries in a month. And it becomes very clear very quickly what threat intel sources have the highest rank of false positives. And with Quad9, I just don't get that. So I just want you to have that feedback and realization that setting that as a high level of importance has served you well, from the perspective of encouraging that adoption that you want solution providers to do by default.
Working with a free service is wonderful in some ways and terrible in others. We have zero friction for people to adopt Quad9. You just change your DNS setting to 9.9.9.9. That's it. No email sign up, no payment, nothing, no contract. And so with the low friction of addition comes low friction of transfer away. So we have to be really, really sensitive about false positives, because as soon as there's a false positive, we lose users. And they typically will go to some other free recursive resolver, very often a recursive resolver that has no security. So you're never going to get a false positive if you have no security. So we have to be really cautious about false positives, and we really work with all of our threat intelligence providers to keep that at a minimum. The downside of that is that we perhaps don't catch things that we could. Meaning that we've asked for a very high confidence level in the data, and there might be some threats that if we asked for a lower confidence level in the data, we would catch, but at the cost of more false positives. And that's one of those constant balances that we're trying to figure out, is maybe do we offer at some point in the future a service that has a lower confidence rating on a different IP address, that that's kind of the kitchen sink. You catch all the things, but you also get a bunch of false positives. There's a lot of effort for that, again, and there's with no income per user, we have to really focus our product portfolio to kind of
Right.
just the narrowest thing that we can. And so right now we haven't decided to do anything with lower confidence level feeds. We're really trying to continue with that very high confidence, low false positive model. So that's what we're targeting. And thanks for the noticing of that. It is always good that we hear that false positives are rare in our feed. They do happen, but we respond to them very quickly, and then we also report that back to our threat intelligence provider and work with them. We've only ever once or twice had to turn off providers for false positives on a permanent basis, where they've just not been able to
Right.
cut it. Most of them, if we've had some false positive issues, we bring it up with them. We say, okay, why did this happen? And they say, oh well, we had another sub feed. Because every threat intelligence provider, not every, but most threat intelligence providers have some they buy from somebody else somehow, and there's one bad actor in their portfolio that's got some issues, or they find an algorithm that's just not working the way it should, and we help them tune that. So again, we try to help everybody downstream and upstream from us.
Right, right. And now, in that space of high confidence, low false positive, I'm guessing that is probably one of the reasons why this notion of blocking based on IP address resolution is not something that I've seen commonly done anywhere yet.
Right.
Because there are certainly threat actors and ASNs that are known to host malicious actors, and the only stuff listening is bad stuff.
IP addresses, as you said, false positives are really challenging with IP addresses because of multi-hosting. And that is not to say that IP addresses are not useful. They actually are useful. We simply don't have a model for that right now. We've had a
Right.
couple threat intelligence providers who have said they have IP-based lists, and so our goal this year, although it's halfway through the year already. Our goal this year is to actually have some proof of concept for IP-based blocking, but we're still a way away from that, because there are some which you can categorically say there's nothing good on them. There's never been a DNS name that's resolved to this IP address that wasn't a threat, so we should be blocking it. So we do recognize that that's an area that we have to solve. But again, the false positive issue is a dangerous one for us. So we have been a little bit slow on the technology side implementing an IP-based block list, because we're also a little bit wary. Like, how much more work is this going to create for us from a false positives perspective? It's not the top thing on our list of things to do right now, but it is there in the pipeline for some point soon.
Oh, that's really good to hear. And I look forward to collaborating with you on that, because we certainly have some thoughts and ideas. And there's very fascinating dynamics for us as a company, and for anybody who's living in the Defender space. And that is, for example, we have a company like Cloudflare that is doing some incredible innovative work providing protection for those that need to have public facing content but don't want their geolocation or their actual server IP address revealed, and even make that a version of that proxy service available for free. And so naturally, as soon as you make it available for free and it's a proxy, where are the bad guys going to go? And so, just as a quick experiment, I thought yesterday, I'm curious how many domain names we have in our passive DNS that is pointing to one of Cloudflare's free proxy service. Just in the month of June, we've observed over 6,000 unique websites using that free proxy service. And yet we couldn't identify a single one of them as being a legitimately needed one, but also not necessarily outwardly exposing malicious or bad content. Now, some of them were already blocked by Quad9 or the other threat intel sources, but it just occurred to me that that number and that trend is really fascinating, and it's going to require another kind of protective path. And so the path that you're on sounds like we should definitely work on it together.
Well, the combination of the forward DNS as well as the IP address of the destination, I think there's some power in looking at the combination of those two things. I will say that I would say primarily, though, we're still going to be looking at forward DNS as the method that's the strongest of the two, because again, multi-hosting, where there are thousands of sites that are pointed to the same IP address or cluster of IP addresses, makes it very difficult, especially when you get to the large CDNs like Cloudflare or Google or AWS, and even in some cases. So yeah, it's going to be constantly a challenge. It is very interesting to see how providers, what providers clean up things the fastest, and where we see the most, what ASNs we see the most blocking traffic on,
Right.
and trying to get those folks to manage their customer base a little more closely. That goes not just for big U.S. companies, but it goes for lots of smaller hosting providers in Asia and Europe and even in Africa.
Speaking of local hosting providers, you have quite a distributed network of your Anycast network has many points of presence around the globe. What number does that sit at today?
I think we're 260 something right now. And the great thing, and I can't speak highly enough of our partners who help us with that. Quad9's network comes at no cost, meaning that we, as a matter of course, we don't pay for infrastructure like co-location hosting power. That's donated to us by a variety of different sponsors and partners, and we are exceptionally grateful for that, because there's no way we could have accomplished what we're doing without that. I mean, if we were paying for that, we would have had to been a many $1 million organization. And in fact, we're very small, not for profit right now. So organizations like Packet Clearinghouse, Edge Uno, i3D, we've got a whole slew of other organizations that partner with us for smaller, 1 or 2 locations. They've been fantastic. Go on our website, look at our partner page. That's the biggest strength that we have, is the scope of the network, the geography of that, in places where ordinarily nobody goes. Like we go to places where there's no money, essentially. And that's kind of different than some of the other cursor resolver operators or infrastructure, hyperscale operators. They're not interested in going to some of these places and providing services with low latency and geographic proximity. Some of these are very difficult to get into,
Right.
and it takes quite a while to do it. So we're very grateful to our partners for giving us that capability, and that's sort of what has driven our growth, is that pushing out to the edge of the network and being the operator who doesn't care that you don't have money. We're not trying to promote some other product. We're not trying to collect people's data for some other purpose. All we're trying to do is give people protective services, and it's great to see so many partners kind of understand that and approve, and not just approve of our mission, but actually help us to complete that. So that's one of the things that kind of keeps me going, even though there's a lot of opposition in some ways. Not opposition, but there's a lot of resistance to doing what we're doing, just because the world works on money, doesn't work on altruism. But the fact that I do see this altruistic behavior by a lot of people makes me very encouraged that we're doing the right thing.
Your circle of associations and friends definitely showcases that. So you've been a source of some other introductions that I've benefited from, and they also live in the Defender space. So I definitely can affirm that is the case. I'm wondering, speaking of POPs and places that are hard to get into, what would be the most remote and difficult place that you've stood up a POP?
Well, I mean, a lot of the credit for the most remote places are going to go mostly to Packet Clearinghouse, PCH. We ride their coattails into a lot of the really more difficult places to get into. A lot of the island nations, places like Mauritius, which have a very relatively small population, but we use their infrastructure in some of those locations. So those are the more difficult ones. Interestingly enough, the most difficult places we've had to get into, meaning the ones that have taken the most time, are things that you wouldn't think are that shouldn't be that difficult. And I'll name Brazil and India as 2 countries which you would think, okay, there should just be, it should just be easy. It isn't. And
Wow.
that's primarily due to very restrictive tariffs on importation of equipment. We don't have a lot of money to pay like huge import fees. All of our equipment that we utilize, that we ship, is all used. We buy stuff off the gray market, things that are coming off lease. Companies dispose all of their equipment, after 4 or 5 years. We buy that and we use it. At the moment, it's mostly Cisco equipment, but we're looking to shifting to potentially some other vendors as well. So we buy that typically in North America, and then we ship it to different places. Well, Brazil, you can't even ship used equipment at all. That's just not allowed. You cannot ship used equipment into Brazil. So, okay, now we have to find new equipment. Well, new equipment has a huge cost to it. It's very, very expensive to buy anything new in Brazil, and same in India. They also have the same kind of import duties, and so that has been a big resistance for getting larger locations into both of those nations. In Brazil, we partnered with Eduno. They actually are an in-country, meaning they've bought equipment inside of Brazil. But even that, the cost of the equipment that we have to basically proxy through them is really exorbitant. Again, if anyone from Brazil or India is listening, this is setting your countries back. You are, this resistance to being able to get equipment into the country, for some reason, okay, Brazil, like as an example, Brazil might be saying that we're trying to generate our own homegrown technology industry. Well, okay, it's 2025. How much do you have? What can I buy in Brazil? The answer is nothing. So they're just holding their economies back by not allowing this uh, free trade, essentially, to be able to get equipment into the country. And there are other countries like Ethiopia, which we still don't have a location in, and the costs for Ethiopia are even worse. Like they're extraordinary import tariffs, and they use list price instead of actual price, and a bunch of other things. So the most difficult places to get into are not the ones that are in the farthest places to ship. It's the places that present the most resistance to deploying our stuff there. Even though there might be people in the country who are like, yes, please bring your systems here, let's get something deployed, we still have to get gear, and that's the resistance. So probably not the answer you're looking for, but that's like Brazil and India.
I had no idea that it was that bad. I mean, I was born and raised in Mexico, and I remember when I was little, the effort that it took just to get something that wasn't domestically made was always riddled with difficulty.
Yeah.
And when you have that level of difficulty, all kinds of crime rings get stood up that attempt to bypass the tariff system,
Yep.
where stuff would get snuck in, it would get put in boxes that it wasn't originally manufactured in, all kinds of tricks, payoff, brown paper bags of money. I mean, all kinds of ways. And to your point, that you almost want to send a message to politicians everywhere that at least in the space of technology, if you want to be relevant, if you think AI has a future, if you think the internet is going to be around next year and the decade after, then at least don't allow this to be the reason why your entire economy is held back. So I would most definitely second that. John, I have a long list of questions, and I'm trying to figure out which direction I should go
Any
in
direction
with.
you'd like.
But I am curious about, because I always like to understand individuals' original motivations. So even before you started your career down this path, was there some aspect of your upbringing or some kind of background that had you leaning towards the defensive posture side? Or were you ever in a position where you practiced the offensive in order to understand the defensive? Or
Sure.
I'm trying to figure out like your personal...
I'm firmly a Gen X, right? So this put me in my teen years, put me right at the crux of telecommunications actually happening, like as a common thing that mortals could do. So when I was in my early teens, I had a BBS, if you recall that, like
Oh my
a
goodness.
modem-based BBS.
Wow.
This was 1983 or 82 with Apple II systems, right? So I was an Apple person initially, going way back into the 80s. And I think the thing that drove me always was curiosity. And so I probably did things that were on the border of legality, trying to figure out what things did and what they did not do, like trying to dial into various systems. I was not a hacker kitty, but like I was always very interested in communications itself. Has been interesting. How do people communicate? By what mechanism do they communicate? So CB radios have always been interesting, or ham radio has been interesting. The internet, of course, was absolutely turbocharging my interest in communications once I got to university. But how do people communicate is more interesting to me than what people communicate about. I'm interested in how people connect. I'm not particularly interested in the content of what they're doing. I'm interested in the mechanisms by which you get messages from place to place. And so that has always interested me from a very early age. My father would bring home, he worked for Kodak for a while, but he would bring home various bits and pieces of the systems that he was working on, and I would take them apart and try to figure out how they worked, including systems, at some point a TRS-80 with a modem on it, and a couple of acoustic couplers, which I ended up connecting to my Apple systems. But that sort of interest in how things talk to each other over distances has been fascinating to me. And again, the DNS is sort of that's like the core part of that. Like, how do you figure out to what you're going to communicate? So I did a bunch of work with phone numbers when I was in the voice over IP space. How do we do mapping of E164 to the DNS? Like, how is it that people communicate? And again, I don't care what you're saying, but how do you find the other person? How do you actually create a virtual tunnel of data to another place? Has always been interesting. And so from the defender space, there's always an implicit defense concept, because any communication that I have, I would assume I want to have that be private. I would assume I want to have that be with the person that I intend it to have. And meaning that both integrity, obscurity are kind of built into any communications model. So there are a bunch of people who disagree with that, right? They'd like to observe what you're talking about, and they'd like to intercept and potentially to fool you into doing something that you shouldn't. So the defender stance comes naturally, I think, in any communications model, at least on the internet, using data, which I think is actually interesting, because that's probably different than people coming out of it who are a little bit older than I am, who are coming out of the telco mindset, because the telecommunications network assumes to be secure by default, even though, of course, we know that's ridiculously untrue. And also that there is an implicit understanding with the telecommunications network that somebody who has authority to listen should be able to listen. And that's very different than the sort of the internet mindset, which is no, I'm the person with whom I'm communicating is the only person that should be understanding or seeing any of that communication. So there is a shift, I think, between the telecom world and the internet world that's, to me, watching the transition is very obvious. And there's still echoes of that happening, where you still see telco mindset trying to be applied to internet. And it is a very generational viewpoint. The internet viewpoint is becoming stronger. There are still some very strong motivations by nation states to say that, okay, communications cannot be private. And there's that constant tension between the two, technology and policy groups. But I am seeing that there's a pleasant shift towards that being assumed, that communications are private, that you should have the ability to understand with whom you're speaking, and that should be a one-to-one, not a one-to-many kind of communication. So I guess to answer your question from the defender standpoint, it just kind of comes built in. Understanding enough about the technology, you know how fragile it can be in some places. So you become much more motivated to protect it where you can.
You reminded me of a somewhat provocative statement that I heard Moxie Marlinspike say some time ago, when he said that in order for liberty to survive, I'm paraphrasing, I don't know the exact quote, but the message was this: in order for liberty to flourish, it must be possible to commit a crime and get away with it, which really had me puzzled at first, because it didn't really make sense in the context of a typical defender. But then when I thought about it from the perspective of, do we want there to be some level of friction for law enforcement to be able to decrypt our private data? And the answer is yes, because that level of friction will allow those of us that are using encryption for legitimately good and private purposes to have a little higher bar. By the same token, we're making them work harder, to expose criminals.
Well, that's interesting that quote exists. I'd not ever heard that from him before. I actually had the same argument in one of my papers in university. I took a course, really actually an excellent course on corruption, taught by somebody who spent a lot of time in China doing work in corruption. This is a long time ago. This is the late 80s, early 90s. But my thesis for the paper was that corruption at a certain level must always be possible, even though it may still be illegal. If you have a system that is perfectly tuned, that has no flexibility in it whatsoever, then you create essentially a recipe for arbitrary and immoral outcomes. And at a large scale, not on the individual scale, but on a large scale. So there always needs to be some flexibility in the system, meaning that there always needs to be the ability to pay off the border guard to allow you and your friends to escape the tyrannical country, right? And if there isn't that flexibility, then you have essentially a recipe for perfect immoral conditions. So yeah, it's sort of the same model, that there needs to always be some flex in the system. It'd require a lot more thought on how to square his comments with what my initial thesis was, but on that paper. But yeah, I don't disagree with that at all.
I mean, I would love to have him on this podcast one day. So if you have ever chatted with him, let him know of my genuine interest in meeting with them, and then maybe we can bring you back in and square that off. Because I think it goes into the web of the security posture that we have today, where those of us that want good, solid encryption are also fighting against the need to defend, where this is what the industry calls the Dr. Paul Vixie problem, where it's my network, my rules, and therefore I need visibility at the edge. And all of us are wrestling with that and have been for some time in doing the best we can with those different dynamics, right? Because as a dad or as a business owner, I have certain responsibilities to protect my network, and hence we are in the defensive world. But when it floats across the internet in the form of a packet, then I don't want the transit provider to have any insight into it other than shuffling the packet from left to right and right to left, right? And so that constant struggle ends up getting very muddied in our experience when either the motives aren't pure or there are aspects of the dynamic that where something is not understood by decision makers. And so the amount of times decisions are made, and we see this in politics all the time, that seem very uninformed is still happening today. And there seems to be this constant arbitrage of information that the good guys can make use for good and the bad guys can make use for bad. And I'm not sure where we'll end up, or if this is
No,
will just be the space that we'll forever have to defend carefully.
I think the one of the core problems that we're facing of this is actor, like identification of the actor. If traffic emanates from my handheld device or my laptop, who is the actor that is generating that traffic and what is its intent? If you could have full assurance that the actor in all cases was the person, like the human being, or the code that you had control over, then the security becomes a lot easier. It becomes a policy question. You can tell people, not to do certain things. And that becomes a question between humans and humans, or humans and code that you run. The problem is that very often the code running on the laptop or the handheld device or whatever it is, the element in your network, you don't actually know who is the operator of that code. You don't know its intentions. You actually have to be much more rigid in your security posture because you don't understand what the intention is and from what person or organization is generating that traffic. This question comes up a lot, right? Because Quad9 is used in some schools. And we don't have yet, although I expect we will have it in the future, we don't have a school safe model. Where we block sites that are inappropriate. What does inappropriate mean anyway? The question of who is it that's generating the traffic becomes the question, and who's actually got control. Those are really difficult ones to answer. Does the network administrator have the right to control content, or is it the end user? And in my opinion, it should always be the case, even though you as a defender might not like this, but it should always be the case that the end user, if they're clever enough, should be able to get to the content that they want if they so intend. But they should be blocked. They should understand that they are being blocked. There should be resistance. They should actually have to knowingly circumvent the resistance to get to the content that is forbidden by the local operator. But if you have a perfectly secure network that doesn't allow some types of content, again, as a parent, that might be okay. As a country, that's probably not okay.
Exactly.
And then, okay, well, the same technology can be used at the country level as can be used at the parent level. I'm a privacy absolutist, meaning I think that people have absolutely the right to not be observed. I'm not an access absolutist. Well, I guess that's not true. It is okay to block people from doing certain things if the laws in your country require that. If, as a parent, you don't want your children seeing certain things, you should be able to block them. Should you be able to absolutely block them? I'm not quite as convinced on that. I think that if they're smart enough and if they have enough ambition, that they should be able to get around it somehow. And they will, right? There's steganography, there's tunneling, there's all kinds of different ways that a person, if they want to get access to data, can get it. But I absolutely believe they should not be able to be observed in what they're doing, because that is actually a much more critical problem, I think, than the access to the data in the first place. Is the once you have access to the data, someone seeing what you're doing, there's a much deeper implication to that.
Right.
But anyway, that's another philosophical discussion we can have, but that's a longer thread. Quad9 tries to work not against network operator. So as an example, malware, right? There are a lot of people who essentially block port 53 and only allow access to Quad9's IP addresses. We also support encryption, right? We support 853 and 443, so DO and DOT. We don't have a bunch of different IP addresses that we offer that on because we recognize that a network operator is going to try to block that. In fact, you'll find Quad9 now in a bunch of different block lists because we are an open recursive resolver.
Right.
We're actually treated as a threat in some places, and I understand why, right? You maybe you don't want people resolving data or resolving DNS rather to an open resolver when you actually have a security model, and that's fine.
Exactly.
But
yeah, we do exactly that, what you just described. The job of the endpoint is to talk to the on-prem optimized caching resolver that utilizes a proper security model, which in turn goes to Quad9. So you end up getting all the benefits that you want.
Yep, that's exactly the model that we support, and we encourage that. We don't have a million IP addresses that we operate our service on. It's like a very small set of IP addresses, so you can, as a network operator, you can block those. That's your right as the network operator. We don't try to circumvent that. The problem is, though, that there are thousands of DNS resolvers out there in the wild, and there are probably thousands of DO resolvers out there in the wild. And how do you identify all of them? And it's a challenge, right? You're probably not going to be able to stop all of them. And I don't know how to square that one either. In other words, a person who's really motivated to get DNS resolution somewhere can get that. The way, and you and I have talked about this in the past, the way to actually solve that is zero trust DNS, which is another method to allow the network operator to block things. So that's an interesting next step.
You led right into the next question because we only have a few minutes left. I wanted to ask you if there's any key innovations that you think are worthy of noting over the past year or two, and if time permits, any upcoming innovations that you think are necessary and or coming in the next while.
I am very interested in zero trust DNS. Quad9's perspective is we really don't have a role in that, right? That's something to be put at the edge of the network. But I'm really interested in that because it makes protective DNS services much more powerful. For those who don't know what zero trust DNS is, the quick summary is that you have a device at the edge of your network. It functions as a recursive resolver, a forwarding cache and a firewall, to simplify it. And if clients have not received a valid A or Quad A record as part of a request, they can't get through the firewall. So essentially it dynamically opens ports on the firewall based on the results you get back from A and Quad A lookups. So this essentially means that the firewall and the DNS resolver becomes your control point for defining firewall rules. Like whatever validly resolves becomes the firewall rule set. I think it's a really great idea. It offloads an enormous amount of work from a firewall administrator because they don't have to add a whole bunch of IP addresses all the time to kind of punch holes through. Whatever Microsoft has in the DNS automatically becomes the firewall rule set. So that's great. Yeah. And it makes Quad9 more powerful because it means that as long as we're resolving everything for you, as long as it's not on our block list, you're going to get it's business as usual. You're not even going to notice it's there. There are some extensions that ZTDNS needs. And we've talked about that as well. Like there are some protocols that still don't use DNS. They just do native IP, and IP purists will say, no, DNS is not the internet. And okay, great. Unfortunately, the world may not agree with that perspective anymore. And certainly enterprises don't. I'm actually really encouraged to see ZTDNS as a thing, doing what we can to see if we can promote that. And I know Atom Networks is a proponent of that as well in your technology stack. My world is becoming very, very focused and narrow these days. I'm working in a draft to try to get rid of Anycast as the linchpin of DNS, and so that'll take a while. It'll take a few years to happen.
Tell us a little bit about that. What's involved, and why will it take a few years to happen?
There's the concept of discovery, which is really actually a very powerful one, and that means if you're operating with a client like a browser or a laptop or a handheld device, and you've just got 9999 as the DNS resolver. So that's unencrypted UDP. You're connecting, you get it as DHCP, you start to connect, you do DNS queries. That's observable, and it's untrusted to some degree. And so what discovery does, the first step is that it actually allows you to migrate from an unencrypted connection to Quad9, and it allows you to move up to an encrypted connection. So that's the first step. Essentially, you do a special lookup to a special name, and the resolver responds back and says, here's how you should actually upgrade to encryption for me. And then the certificate exchange happens. And now your client, completely invisibly to the end user, is encrypted using encrypted DNS. So that's great. So that's discovery. Now, typically bigger recursive resolvers operate on what's called Anycast. We announce the same address from 260 locations around the world. And that means you get routed to the nearest one. And that's the only place you can go. If you're in Frankfurt, you go to the Frankfurt one. If you're in London, you go to the London one. But that's not actually true. A lot of our clients are in China and they get sent to Amsterdam because that's the way the internet has routed them, even though it's a terrible decision. What we would like to be able to do is say, okay, if you're in China and you're getting routed to Amsterdam, you know what? Instead of connecting to the Amsterdam location, we'd rather you connect to the Tokyo location because it's actually less latency. There's no way to do that right now. I shouldn't say that. There's no easy and reliable way to do that right now. The draft that I'm working on called EDSR, it allows the recursive resolver to say, hey, you've connected to me. We've got an encrypted connection going, and that's great. But you know what? I'm not the best place for you to talk, Mr. Client. You should talk to this other system, this Unicast system. It's somewhere else. It's a way of using Anycast as a rendezvous protocol, but actually ending up and pointing the client to a different place based on latency or based on maintenance mode or based on traffic volume or any number of other different criteria. It allows you to redirect the clients to spread things out. The goal here is actually to put Quad9 out of business. The problem right now is in order to start a global Anycast resolver, even just to start a regional Anycast resolver, or even an ISP resolver, you've got to have a lot of resources. You've got to be able to take hotspot traffic. Right. You've got to be able to handle weird routing issues that send all of your clients to some place where you weren't expecting them to be. And that is a real difficult problem to solve. And it means that you have to have a certain amount of sophistication to operate a medium or large recursive resolver. And that closes the door on a lot of smaller organizations. People are outsourcing their DNS to, Quad9, or they're outsourcing it to Google or Cloudflare. I would like to see that barrier brought down and simply say, okay, with this technology, you can have a rendezvous server that gets the first requests, but then distribute that out across your network. If you're a small ISP, you want to have people ending up in the city in which they're connected, right? If you have like 5 cities, you want to have your users tend to end up in the 5, in whatever place is closest or best for them. You want to have the ability to have maintenance without having to actually close connections and force a city down and then use BGP to redirect people, which is really ugly and interrupting traffic and everything else. So it's a way to operationalize DNS in a way that hasn't been done before, and balance it out a little bit better at the application layer rather than at the network layer.
That is really cool. So you've actually given me even more insight than you've already given me in the past. So this is like an optimized version of a DDR in an opportunistic mode.
Yeah.
Because you're basically taking it to a larger scale. That's more like a network operator level, whereas our approach with DDR opportunistic mode is local network level that can upgrade its DNS encryption even on private IP address space.
Mm-hmm. So this would, as an example, if you had redundant systems in an enterprise, it would allow you to shift. If a user ended up going to machine number 1 and you knew you were going to go into maintenance mode on machine number 1 in another hour, you would configure it so that EDSR would start to tell clients, you know what, don't connect to me, connect to the IP address of the other machine. Right. So basically smoothly transition all of your users away, or any new users and existing users, transition them away from one machine and move them onto the other, so that you didn't have an abrupt outage where you simply turned off a machine and then hoped that BGP, whatever your layer 2 or layer 3 model would pick up the right things, which is with encryption, it's fairly difficult, sharing state and all that other stuff. You don't have to worry about state. You can just tell them to reinitiate a new connection to a new place. Again, it's not using a hack. It's using you're actually doing it at the application layer and saying, hey, you're like, thank you for connecting. I am the wrong place for you to connect. Go over there. That's the way an application should behave.
Right.
Like we have 302 redirects in HTTP, and this is basically just doing, it's not exactly the same, but it's a very similar thing. Like, you've connected to me, I don't have the answers. Go somewhere else. Although interestingly, it doesn't actually say that. It says, you've connected to me. I'll give you the answers for the time being, meaning I'll respond to your DNS request, but I would like you to go somewhere else. So it actually is even smoother than HTTP.
John, this is so fascinating. I wish we had an extra hour, but I only asked an hour of you today. But if we went down any further in this rabbit trail, I'd be saying, it's quite interesting that this whole approach actually addresses another concern that you've been working on. You've been doing good work in terms of fighting litigious scenarios that ask Quad9 to be the agent of enforcement of copyright claims. But that's not the role of a recursive resolver, is your position, and you've taken on a good defensive posture there. Well, what's interesting to me now that you say this is that this mechanism could be used by Quad9 to say...
It can be used for all kinds of things, David.
I'm so excited.
All kinds of things.
You just lit up another bunch of light bulbs for me today. So, and also I want to say thank you for working with me and Tommy Jensen on this draft on the protocol that we need to have application developers adopt for IP addresses that were not discovered by a DNS. So that's been a really helpful contribution. And thanks very much. I don't know if you have any last comments you want to add before I wrap up at the hour like I promised. Yes.
We've talked about security as the thing that we're most interested in. And I've sort of commented about privacy and unobservability. The thing that sets Quad9 a little bit apart from everybody else is that we don't just provide the security, we don't provide the defender's stance. We also have a built-in policy model that prevents people from getting your private data. We're located in Switzerland, which is very different than anybody else at the moment, and so that I think is one of the most interesting things that we have going for us, is that we have a legal regimen around what we can do with data. Like, in other words, what we're allowed to do with data, and the legal repercussions if we don't do what we say we're doing are very strict. And also it gives us some defense in that Swiss law is extremely good for keeping others from demanding data of us, even we don't collect data at all. We don't collect anything about end users, but it prevents countries or courts in different jurisdictions from getting their claws into us, which is a very, very powerful and important component of what we do and why we're different than some other operators. I wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit about privacy, and that's sort of the privacy, the legal aspects of privacy, and the whole legal issues we have around copyright is a whole nother story for another day. We're trying to defend the DNS both on an individual level, meaning preventing bad things from happening to individuals, but we're also trying to prevent bad things from happening to the DNS as a whole, where the DNS could be used as an attack method for a variety of different economic activities. So we're paddling very furiously, as they say. The duck looks calm on the surface, even though it's paddling like crazy to keep up. And we're always looking for sponsors and people who can help us with that, because we're desperately in need of funding as a tiny organization in a room full of elephants.
Well, from what I've observed over the past 8 years, you are punching well above your weight and continuing to sustain the growth. And when we use DNS benchmarking tools, we consistently see at the top, like, all of those reasons you're doing things right and you're doing the right things. So kudos to your leadership at Quad9 and everyone else there.
It's the team that gets the credit. I just do the talking.
Yeah, thank you. And we got your proper social links from your team that we're putting on the screen for people who want to know. And if you do want to validate the legal cases that through the help of Quad9 and John in particular and their legal defense have successfully defended, it's all available online. So thanks again, John. I look forward to seeing you at a Defenders event very soon.
Appreciate the time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
The Defender's Log requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.